Welcome back to A Clock in the Journal, where intelligence can become its own blind spot. Tonight, a brilliant mind, a flawless theory, and a plan that trusts itself too much. Max Carrados listens to reasoning at its sharpest, and here's the moment cleverness turns against itself. The mysterious affair of the anatomical subject that ended in a Great Western Corridor Express really began in a New York mansion when Mr. Hiram S. Nog, wearing noiseless slippers, inconsiderately wandered into the remotest of his 5 palatial drawing rooms, to the embarrassment of his niece Sabina and the even more pronounced dismay of Rigby Lacksome. In the terms of Mr. Lacksome's unspoken comment, the premature discovery of the idol knocked a piece of varnish off the mudguard, and he rapidly speculated that unless something drastic and convincing could be brought into the situation, not only his excellent chance of winning Miss Craddock's hand, together with a reasonable settlement, but even his tenure of usefulness as Mr. Nog's third secretary stood in jeopardy. But having been modeling himself on the strong, silent pattern for some time past, nothing really useful occurred to him. "Well, Pop," remarked the maiden, after she had nicked her hair into position. Long residence in the Nog household had led to the adoption of this unpleasant form of endearment at her lips. "What you gotta say about it?" Rainproof, Nog fingered his scanty goatee dubiously and looked from one to the other of the young people in mild reproach. He had been warned by his private specialist that strong emotion consumed tissue, so he never ran to it now that he was 75. He just acted in the same way, but without the excuse of deep feeling. "Don't know that I've anything much to say, Sabby," he replied guardedly. "Leastways, not in words. Rigby was going to Europe for the sales next week. Reckon he'd better go over just the same, and maybe stay there." "I guess not," speculated Miss Craddock in an equally level voice. "England's all right for a trip, but I don't congeal to the idea of a permanency. I must have room to reverse in." "I wasn't exactly thinking of you, Sabby," said the old man. "No," agreed Sabina. "But from a child onwards, I've always been encouraged to think for myself. And from what Rigby's just said, I understand that if he went, he'd wish to take me with him. I hope, sir, you won't consider that there's anything clandestine in my conduct beneath your roof." Bracing himself against the Sicilian marble mantelpiece, Rigby began to recover something of the attitude of the noble lover, a pose necessarily checked as yet by the uncertainty of the old man's real feelings. "For some time past I have regarded Miss Craddock with sentiments of respectful admiration, but until this morning, when speaking of my forthcoming trip to Europe, I have never—" "That's so?" interrupted Mr. Nog enigmatically. "Well, we'll leave it there. Now, did that Shrubworth sale catalogue come in from Sotheby's by this morning's mail?" "Yes, sir," replied Rigby rather blankly. That was old Nog all over. Until it suited his own convenience, the young man wouldn't have the least indication whether it was going to be the foot of ignominious expulsion or the hand of golden blessing. "I want to go through it with you then," said Hiram briskly. "Bring it to my room when Johnson leaves." He slid noiselessly away again, and after a very subdued exchange of protestations with his inamorata, Rigby followed him. As he went to find the catalogue of the celebrated Shrubworth collection of Shakespeareana, he was thinking harder and more rapidly than he had perhaps ever done before. Max Carrados, you may remember, had some connection with the United States. He had inherited his not inconsiderable fortune from an American cousin, who had in his time been a successful speculator. A speculator not exactly in crops, which are notoriously kittle-cattle, but in official crop reports. With a select few of his friends out there, the blind man endeavored to hold for a little longer a solitary outpost of the lost cause of polite correspondence. It is to be inferred that his contributions were acceptable. In return, he certainly learned much that even the sleuths of American journalism failed to get on to, and once or twice his information was curiously effective. "I doubt if you will ever have met Rainproof Nog," wrote one about this time. A shrewd old lady whose Dutch-sounding name caused pushful young hostesses to prick up their ears even when it reached them at third hand. Not a great many years ago he was living precariously on the crumbs that fall from rich men's wastepaper baskets, but during the last decade or two he has shot forward amazingly. I don't quite know what he does, but if I had a son, no, I should prefer it to be my grandson, I think I would put him to it. We have wheat kings and cotton kings and coal kings, railroad kings, stationary engine kings, and Mr. Ford. Kings in the realms of hardware, software, sectional bookcases, crime, and canned tomatoes. But all these sovereigns have some connection with the domains they represent. I have never heard that Rainproof Nog had any connection with anything. I believe that people just bring schemes to him, and if he approves of them, they give him a share of the scheme for approving. It seems an easy way. At any rate, Mr. Nog is vastly wealthy, but he is growing old. This disease, I am told, has brought a morbid affection in its train, a dread that when he is dead he will be forgotten. It has become a terrible thing that in spite of his power and influence now, when he is gone his memory will soon be utterly effaced. I suppose he has been thinking. True, he has 3 thin-lipped, razor-jawed, stern-faced Wall Street sons, who will doubtless go on gathering more and more moss around the name of Nog until the Constitution is amended to suppress them. So long as I can keep the money-making in the family, I can afford to pay other people to do the spending, is a golden nugget. But that only raises the problem one power higher. Rainproof, poor romanticist, wants to be remembered in the way that George Washington, Cole W.F. Cody, Pocahontas, and Mary Garden will always be. You have heard of his national temple out in Virginia. That we possessed no Westminster Abbey must have touched his native pride somewhere, and he has set out to remove the slur by building and endowing a lordly private Valhalla on one of his 17 estates for the last sleep of the great. Eminent Americans are to be invited to direct by will their interment there, and in the case of Americans not so eminent as to be invited, but who have nevertheless expressed a wish to join the others, a committee will decide. It seems a touchy business all along. One cannot but think that Rainproof will have established a lien on the verdict of that committee when his own case comes up. A long shot it may be at immortality, but longer ones have hit, or Guido Fawkes, William Tell, and Samuel Pepys were forgotten now. In another direction, Mr. Nog has found what I imagine has been signally lacking in his life here too, amusement. And this brings me at last back to my original sheep. A fleece in which you may discover the predatory Rainproof's lupine form. You collect something I know, but what it is between cigarette pictures and stuffed mammoths, I can plead the most benighted ignorance. But I know that you will have the best of them, whatever they are. And so, hark ye, my friend, a word in your judicious ear. If they should be Shakespeareana by any chance, lock them up until you hear that a young man called Rigby Lacksome has returned to the land of his fathers. For by this time Rainproof is quite slightly Shakespeare mad. A while ago he was advised by a prominent nerve and stomach consultant, the two things go together here it seems, to cultivate more interest outside business. Rainproof made the one recorded joke of his existence then, but let that pass. Whether the poor old gentleman heard the bard's curious name for the first time about that period, or whether it was because his great financial rival, Slogger MacMahomet, was commissioning Frisman to corner First Folios matters not. At all events, Rainproof went down into the Shakespeareana pit and became a bull power. His first acquisition was a wistful young expert who had been in the ancient book business, but who was quite content to get out of it. Mr. Lacksome, to wit. He was to be Rainproof's librarian and Shakespeare secretary. This, I glean, is how they got to work. See here, said Mr. Nog, I hear that fellow on the other side the street has just given $1,500 for a book called Hamlet, printed way back in the Dark Ages. Now I shall expect you to go one better. R.L. considered. I know of a copy that might be got, he replied, but you would have to go at least $200 more, because it is half an inch taller than MacMahomet's example. Inch, snapped Rainproof. I don't do things by inches now, young man. Find me one that's about half a yard taller, and I won't jib at $2,000 more. He has been put wiser since then. You will have heard of the anonymous purchase last fall of the Croxton Park First Folio for 4,000 guineas. He buys anonymously on Wall Street principles. Yes, like Masheath's Polly, Mr. Nog by now is most confoundedly bit. Will I bring this disquisition to a seemly close? I will, sir, and then only will you plumb its dark significance. R.L. is on his mettle, and the attitude of rainproof is that of an expectant child with its mouth open and its eyes closed. For the engaging young librarian has fallen beneath the charm of Rainproof's not wholly guileless niece, and in return has found favor in her eyes. But what, everyone will naturally ask, what about the expression of old man Nog's eyes? For on that the exact complexion of love's young dream must turn. Well, our quite astute Romeo has thrown out a very effective fly, and the poor fish has risen. It is to be something so rarely and preciously Shakespearean that our hero begs the continuance of his employer's confidence until his return. Is this mere bluff for time? Or what? A manuscript, a signature, another portrait, a counter-cryptogram. However, young Lochinvar has gone out of the West verbum sap. For you collectors are, well, how shall I put it? Rainproof will do it for me. Reckon even in England they take some stock of W. Shakespeare as an asset. So if you get a safe chance at anything unique, Rigby, don't think that I shall worry you any about just how it happened, so long as I don't come in it, he remarked. I just bet you won't, sir, replied R.L. frankly. So now you know. Mr. Carrados dropped the copy of the Pall Mall Gazette that he had been reading and turned to light a cigarette. Greatorex, he remarked across the room. This is the Suffragettes. Latest. They have tried to blow up Stratford-on-Avon Church. My Sunday hat, exclaimed the secretary, deeply impressed. So that was it. Was what? With no particular appearance of regret, Annesley Greatorex detached himself from the occupation of typing letters and came across to his employer's chair. In a sort of way, I suppose I am an accessory before the fact, he remarked with some complacency. At least, I knew that they were up to some special brand of devilment from Moya's hints and general air of mystery and triumph. Began about last Friday. Moya, repeated Mr. Carrados. Do you mean to say that your shy little sister has become a militant? Mr. Greatorex essayed a hollow laugh with considerable success. Shy, you said, sir, and I think you saw Moya less than 6 months ago? Well, the shrinking violet has been had twice since then for brawling, and if her mother hadn't contrived influenza in the very nick of time, I understand that the timid fawn had arranged to chain herself to the minute hand of Big Ben, to prove that women are moving with the time, I suppose. Fine spirit, Greatorex. Moral hashish, I tell her, sir, amended Annesley with severity. It's a pretty grey outlook for England if these are a sample of the mothers of the coming generation. Max Carrados turned away from his ingenuous young assistant in order to strike a match for which he had no use. What did you hear about this business? He asked, indicating the open paper. Well, you know what these young women are. I won't say they can't keep a secret, but at the same time they like to let it out on a string and then pull it back again. Now that Moya is on the active list of the precious cause, she and half a dozen other hectics are in and out of our place like rabbits all day long. And ever since Friday there's been a sort of we could and if we would innuendo in the air. Hello, exclaimed Mr. Carrados with interest. Shakespeare again. How the bard persists. Force of example, sir. Moya and her new friend Mamie have been shrieking appropriate quotations at one another, upstairs and down, for days past. Of course, I didn't see the exact point of the various shafts of wit until now, but this is evidently what was brewing. Oh, thought Mr. Carrados speculatively, Mamie. Trust an American, he said aloud, to know more Shakespeare than 9 out of 10 of us. I suppose your sister's friend is from the States? She just is, sir, replied Mr. Greatorex, pitching his voice into what he considered an appropriate twang, and devoted to the emancipation of her downtrodden British sisters. Says they are real ladies but want gingering some. Seems to be doing it too. "I'll bet this last affair was her idea. Do you know what she is doing here? She says she is the European representative of the Bluff Folly Weekly Rapier. My holy aunt. All rather slack and jejune, doubtless." But Annesley Greatorex was no fool, despite his occasional lapses of exuberance. He knew precisely to the dot of N, I, and the crossing of A, T, where he stood with Mr. Carrados, and when the blind man merely indicated the newspaper paragraph that had started the digression, it was read aloud to him with excellent clearness and diction by an entirely staid and businesslike assistant. Attempt to blow up Stratford-on-Avon Church. Suffragettes' latest outrage. Shortly after midnight, a determined attempt was made to wreck a portion of Holy Trinity Church, Stratford-on-Avon, by means of an explosive bomb. Many residents in various parts of the town were awakened about that hour by a loud report, and on investigation being made, it was discovered that a sensational attack had been carried out with the parish church as its objective. Both the fire brigade and the police were quickly on the spot, but the services of neither were immediately required, for no conflagration resulted from the explosion, and the dastardly perpetrators of the outrage were clear of the scene before the earliest investigators arrived. Copies of suffragette leaflets strewn about clearly indicate the purposy of this discreditable affair. Detailed examination made when it was light reveals the extent of the damage is less than might have been expected. The spot chosen for the attack is on the north side of the chancel, and here several courses of masonry are shattered, much glass, fortunately all modern, broken, and the tracery of one window destroyed. The exact point of the explosion was against the walled-up doorway of what is known as the old charnel house, and here the force of the bomb is shown by the dummy door on the interior being blown out. Those familiar with the sacred edifice will recognize from this description that the explosion took place within a few feet of Shakespeare's monument. It may be assumed, indeed, that this was the real objective, and that nothing but a slight miscalculation due to the darkness of the night, and, possibly, the nature of the explosive used, saved it from destruction. Fortunately, we are spared this crowning act of vandalism. The monument is absolutely untouched, and the actual damage can be made good without any loss of historic association. That is all, sir. No, here is something more about it in the fudge. Greatorex rearranged the paper to display the stop press space and read on. Stratford-on-Avon explosion. Later. A representative of Mr. Hiram S. Nogg, the American millionaire and Shakespearean enthusiast, who happens to be staying in the town, communicated with his principal as soon as the news of the outrage reached him. As a result of this timely intervention, Mr. Nogg has generously undertaken to defray the entire cost of repairs. The work will be put in hand immediately, the church meanwhile being closed to the public. I think that really is all, sir. Thank you, said Mr. Carrados. That will do. Now bring me Velp's First Empire, will you? I want a reference. Greatorex stared at his employer almost with concern. I'm sorry, but don't you remember? You advised me to read it and... True. I told you to take it home with you. It's still there? Yes, sir. But I could cut out and be back under the hour. Time to do these letters for the post. No. I want you for something else. And Parkinson is out. I wonder. I could phone to some people who live next door. They'd take a message in, and if Moya is about, she'd bring it like a shot. Do you think so? That would be very convenient. But it seems rather too bad. Not a bit, sir, declared Annesley with easy generosity. She thinks no end of you. In fact, only the other day, she said that if she was put on to set this house on fire, she wouldn't. Really? Said Max Carrados, much gratified apparently. Yes, she said she'd certainly persuade someone else to do the job. But, of course, at this hour, it's just a toss-up. As it happened, however, Mr. Carrados might be said to have won the toss, for Miss Greatorex was discovered to be at home, and as she arrived at the turrets within 40 minutes, she may be judged to have come like a shot. She was a small, elfin creature. The good looks of the family had begun and ended with Annesley, who in intimate political circles was generally referred to as the Vole. "Come and have some tea, Miss Greatorex, and tell me all the secret history of the day," suggested Mr. Carrados, and grinning amiably the vole complied, to the extent of taking tea at all events. "I know that you don't quite approve of us yet, Mr. Carrados," she remarked, "but that's only because you've never really thought it out. None but the very young and the very stupid are actually hostile." "They're all as pert as poll parrots, sir," apologized Annesley. "That's a fair sample." Moya showed her splendid little teeth at him across the table, but refrained from any of the half-dozen appropriate retorts provided by the textbook for the occasion. After all, there would be no particular sense in exposing Annesley's intellectual shallowness to his employer, and she was quite reasonably fond of her brother, although he would come on the forthcoming register with larger qualification. "I suppose this is some of your fatuous work," he remarked presently, pointing to the open evening paper. "I hope you are proud of it." "Officially, I know nothing of it, Buttons," she replied graciously, "but it seems to have made some stir." "Good heavens! Can that possibly be what the idiots intended?" "Well, for mercy's sake, don't call me by that ridiculous name now we're grown up," he besought. "At least, I am." "You certainly came within an ace of making a much greater stir," interposed the host, "as peacemaker. I wonder how your friends came to miss the monument." "Perhaps they didn't want to hit it," suggested the girl cryptically. "Don't you believe it, sir," put in Annesley with vigor. "They'd blow up old Shakespeare himself if they could, to keep in the limelight. Mr. Carrados, do you think that the man who created Portia would object in the least to having that smug, fat-headed image of a retired pork butcher blown into atoms, if it would help to get her the vote?" "I think," replied Mr. Carrados with a laugh, "that he would recommend you to make better bombs, if you want to prove that you can do anything." "Hear, hear," applauded Annesley, somewhat at a venture. Moya Greatorex shot a curious little glance at the smiling Carrados, and a quizzical expression twisted her small face. "I don't mind telling you something, Mr. Carrados," she remarked, looking down upon her plate demurely. "It was a man who contrived this particular demonstration." "Oh, we Englishmen can't," he hastened to declare. "Too law-abiding, I suppose. You ought to get an Irishman or an American to do that sort of job." "How sharp you are," she laughed. "Well, as it happens, he is an American." In the pause, of indignation on one gentleman's part, but of signal complacency on the other's, that followed this little note of triumph, Miss Greatorex rose to go. "Goodbye," she said, giving Carrados her hand. "I'm very glad to have been of this slight service to you." "Thank you," he replied. "It was most good of you to bring the book." "Oh, the book!" She dismissed that casually. "Yes, but of course I was referring to the information that you wanted. Frankly, Mr. Carrados, I'm not at all satisfied with the ins and outs of that affair myself." She nodded luminously, and under the escort of a rather mystified brother took her departure. "Greatorex," remarked the blind man, when his secretary returned, "I am not subscribing to a general principle at all, but it would be absurd to deny that your sister ought to have a vote." It was in this haphazard way that Mr. Carrados was fated to be drawn into the curious Shakespeare case. A gossipy letter from an American friend coupled with the Stratford-on-Avon outrage, and the contiguous circumstance that his secretary's sister happened to be in the council of the militants. Personally, it was no affair of his. Whatever Rigby Lacksome had in mind, a cabinet of Greek tetradrachms did not attract him, and it would be idle to pretend that the amateur criminologist was stirred by public spirit to interest himself in a felony that he saw impending. He would be just as likely to assist in it if his sympathy went that way. No, as he himself would be the first to admit, it was nothing but the element of mystery that attracted here. Until that had been set at rest, something unsatisfied would continue to disturb the even balance of his mind. "That is well enough, my friend," he said to himself that night, "but you have precious little to go on. Coincidence is simply the meeting of two straight lines, and they, we all know, can never enclose a space. Before going any farther on a wild goose chase, I should advise you to verify the admitted American influence in the affair as connectable with Rigby Lacksome, the Get Shakespeareana Anyhow figure in the drama. Until that point is settled, both wings of your deductions are purely in the air." "All right," replied the other moiety. "I will. That strange young creature certainly will know, and if I ask her nicely, as I might have had the sense to do before, I think she may have enough originality to tell me." "Do you?" scoffed the negative participant. "Well, I very much doubt it." Without wasting any more time in arguing, Mr. Carrados sat down and wrote his diplomatic little note. He had to wait several posts for any answer. He heard incidentally from Greatorex that his sister was out for scalps somewhere, but one at length arrived. This was the form it took. "Dear Mr. Carrados, in reply to yours, the reference you require would seem to be in Brutus's third speech, Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2. Yours truly, Moya Greatorex." "Reference I require?" pondered the recipient dubiously, walking to a bookcase. "Now did I?" By this time his hand had gone unerringly to the book he sought, and he was turning the pages among the tragedies. "Well, anyhow, here is the reference I require, whatever it is. Brutus, I am not gamesome. I do lack some part of that quick spirit that is in Antony." A sudden light broke upon him, and he repeated the first line with expression. "Lack some part." Lacksome, of course. That girl is a born conspirator, I'll take oath. In 15th century Italy, she'd have been up to the neck with some ring-and-dagger party. In these prosaic days, she has to be a militant suffragette. Well, that settles it. But what did it settle, after all? Assuming the accuracy of his information, the curious fact was established that Mr. Rigby Lacksome, ostensibly in England to attend the book sales, had prompted a convenient organization to carry out a raid on a certain historic building, while he himself immediately appeared on the scene with an arrangement to make good the damage. It could scarcely be an elaborate plan to get Rainproof's name associated with Stratford. That result could have been obtained in 100 showier and less expensive ways. There was also a detail that might begin to assume significance. One gathered that, on the whole, the demonstration had somehow missed its full point. The local reports suggested so much, and Moya's suspicions might very well have been awakened by that very fact. Carrados was inclined to agree with his outspoken secretary that the militants, then at the apex of their frenzy, would be much more likely to blow up the poet's tomb itself rather than to spare his effigy. Was there, indeed, some double purpose here at work? In a reflective mood, Robinson Crusoe made a tabulated statement of the prospects of his case. In much the same vein, Max Carrados now drew a sheet of foolscap before him and stated the position. What does Rigby Lacksome need? He must procure an incomparable Shakespeare item before he returns. Fair means or foul allowed. What has he achieved already? He had gained the most privileged access to Stratford-on-Avon Church under unique conditions. The church and grounds will be closed against further militant attacks. The portions under repair may be screened off if he requires it, and there is no reason to suppose that he cannot introduce workmen of his own selecting. What special points will be under his direct control? Shakespeare's monument and Shakespeare's grave are both at this spot. Carrados creased and recreased the sheet of paper a dozen times with absent-minded precision as he began to pace the room, making his way among the scattered furniture with startling certainty, pausing now and then to touch a special piece of ivory or bronze, just as another's eyes might linger for a moment on a possession in half-unconscious satisfaction. The monument, the grave, the monument. Among the many very baffling inconsistencies of Shakespeare's life, the outstanding mystery is surely this: that of all his prolific work, in bulk almost equal to the English Bible, in importance second only to that book, not a line of manuscript is known to exist today. Nothing approaching this complete effacement can be paralleled in literary history, and to equip legend, when the poet who scrupulously particularized his worn wearing attire and his second-best bed came to the making of a will, not the obliquest reference to the contingencies of 37 dramas finds a place therein. If William Shakespeare had been the greatest exponent of the modern method, he could scarcely have planned a more effective stunt. The Baconian heresy is one of its firstborn, certainly the lustiest of its offsprings, but the curious inquirer among the byways of literary credulity will start many another hair. The monument, the grave. What, for instance, was that American theory? Most of the Shakespeare heterodoxies spring from that vigorous soil. That in the poet's tomb, secure beneath the everlasting curse, though too much strain should not be put on that protection in these material days, the missing manuscripts may still be found, in extenso and intact. Well, as to that, both before Shakespeare's time and after, poets have buried their lyrics in their own graves, or someone else's, and one at least of the greatest of the latter has repented and dug them up again. "I don't feel drawn to that particular line," mused the blind man, wheeling short on his beat to seek his bookshelves again. "No one believed it here, and I doubt if anyone now does in the States. No. Judith made greased cake papers of the sheets of Romeo and Juliet that she found about, and practical-minded W.S. nodded approval. But ye gods! Imagine a complete and original MS of, say, Hamlet today. Would gold, literally in millions, buy it?" He drew from its shelf a volume of that useful series, The American Catalogue, and soon found the entry he required. "Where are W.M. Shakespeare's manuscripts?" by Hasdrubal Pott. Philadelphia, 1866. It ran. It might be worthwhile to look it up. Lacksome will certainly know of it, and one must be on equal terms with him. He copied the details with his invariable precision, and added a line for Greater X's guidance. Shadrock, of Museum Street, will be the likeliest to have this. "It's wrong, wrong, wrong," he repeated softly as he put back the book. "I should feel it down to my finger ends if I was going right, but what else can there be? The monument. No earthly use or chance there. After all, Lucy Heimskirk did specify manuscript, and she may have had an inkling. Perhaps I'd better make sure of what she really says." It was easy in that room of perfect system to refer to anything, and in another minute Carrados was reading again the faintly ironic commentary on Rainproof Nog's lamentable ambitions. At the time that he had received the letter, he had attached only the interest of amusement to a warning that was plainly half or wholly jest. But now, as he touched line after line, his long, delicate fingers seemed to linger for an inspiration. And then, in a flash, it came. ... You have heard of his national temple out in Virginia, a lordly private Valhalla for the last sleep of the great. For by this time, Rainproof is quite slightly Shakespeare-made. The paper fell unheeded from the blind man's hand. He was caught up in the magnificence of the brazen enterprise. "My gosh!" he exclaimed at last. "But that would lick creation, wouldn't it, Uncle Sam?" It is one thing to know that you are right. It is rather another to go to the length of putting your entirely unsupported conviction into practice. Before he had bargained for quite so astonishing a revelation, Mr. Carrados had pledged himself in his note to Moya Greatorex that there should be no prosecution. He nearly always kept that sort of undertaking, and in the present case he had no intention of departing from it, but it might mean that he would be able to avail himself very little of any official help. But in the first place it would be desirable to strengthen the case somewhat, not so much on his account as against the contingency that he might have to lay his suspicions before other and less romantic-minded people before he had done with it. If he had entered upon the adventure casually, he was now in it up to the neck, and with no intention of being left behind. There were two ends at which he could begin, in London or in Stratford. The latter was the more conclusive ground, but at the same time the more delicate. No harm would be likely to come of any sort of indiscreet move made here in London, but on the scene of the exploit a single false step might easily be fatal. For, be it noted, with his keen appetite for crime, Max Carrados was not so much concerned to scotch a plot before it came to fruition as to demonstrate, if only to himself, that his deductions had been correct. In the meanwhile, he took certain simple precautions against being forestalled by Lacksome's sudden departure, and then, satisfied that he had made the position safe, he turned with leisurely deliberation to the more delicate lines of investigation. For this theoretical side of the business there was one formula alone: To the extent that Carrados was able to merge himself within the skin of Rigby Lacksome, would success or failure attend him? Rigby Lacksome arrived in London, his plan well in train, certain things assured, certain difficulties ahead, a keen appreciation that the stake was a high one, and that at the last moment, when it might be touch and go, no untoward irregularity must arise to rob him of the prize with the goal in sight. Come now, what would Rigby do? From this starting point, Carrados launched 4 entirely different lines of inquiry. Not one of them came to anything, and the time was slipping by. It looked very like having to go on to Stratford and take up the case by the thick end. Before admitting this measure of defeat, the blind man sent the arrow of venture on one more flight. I want you to hunt round and see if it's possible to pick up a fairly complete human skeleton, he said to Greatorex the next morning. I shan't need you again today, so you can go off and let me know tomorrow how you got on. Righto, assented Mr. Greatorex cheerfully. He had hunted round after rather out-of-the-way things for his employer too often to be startled. What about the price? There won't be any price. I don't propose to go to the length of buying one, but you needn't let that out. Just talk to anyone who seems to have anything to say. Even if you come across one for sale, you can go on trying all the same. I want to cut across a similar inquiry, successful or unsuccessful, in the past few weeks. It is not impossible that Lacksome may have bought one. If you strike that, get all you can about it. Anyone who's been asked for another skeleton so recently is sure to want to mention it. Annesley smiled his usual happy smile of charmed agreement and got as far as the door. Oh, where had I better try, sir? He asked, pausing there. That's just what I'm not going to tell you, replied Mr. Carrados with decision. Your chief asset in this business is that you know nothing about it, and you are quite likely to go where any other stranger in the same position might get. Now see what you can make of it. The wanderings of Annesley Greatorex throughout that livelong day, he was a generous worker on occasions, might be treated from a variety of dramatic standpoints, being tragic, comic, farcical, melodramatic, or extravaganzic alternately, or even several at once. Nor could the claims of pantomime and mystery justly be omitted. Annesley's own considered verdict was that any account, from its lack of cohesive plot, its tenuous thread of connecting interest, and its wealth of varied and irrelevant detail, could only be done justice to as a musical comedy. It began in the back parlor of Miss Poppington's surprising establishment in Putney High Street, and ended in the Lost Property Office at London Bridge. Between those limits, Annesley visited 2 general hospitals, a phrenologist off Fleet Street, an eminent naturalist in Piccadilly, a metal dealer down the Elephant and Castle Way, Madame Tussaud's, a theatrical costumier in Convent Garden, a wholesale toy merchant near Aldgate Pump, a Harley Street specialist, a firm of auctioneers, a museum in Lincoln's Inn Fields, a housebreaker, the legal variety, a retired conjurer, and about 8 other people less easy to define. In most cases he had sought these at someone else's suggestion, and the abiding impression he retained of that wonderful day was of the extraordinary good nature of nearly everybody. Annesley certainly had a pleasant way with him, and in the end he had the most astonishing success. It came as the result of one of these kind suggestions. The housebreakers, in point of fact. Look here, mate, said the giant in charge. What about the big West End stores? Tried any yet? No, admitted Annesley, who had come on there from an educational appliance maker. Do you think it would be any good? Why not give it a run? I should. There's Blackley and Whiting now, up Kensington way. My missus isn't an easy one to please, and she says they have nearly everything there that she can even think of. Can't do no harm anyway. Annesley thanked the dusty giant gracefully and withdrew. Blackley and Whiting, whose proud boast it was that anything from a troupe of performing earwigs to a desert island would not find them wanting, ought certainly to be on his list. Nonetheless, he felt some of the diffidence of youth at stating his business when, unconsidered entrance brought him face to face with a tall, blonde lady in the glove department. These big, busy shops, thought Annesley, expect one to be precise, and yet the tall, blonde guide would probably, he feared, emit a piercing shriek. He asked to see the manager. it would be meticulous to cavil about a definite article. Annesley, at all events, saw an important-looking gentleman with a managerial air. He listened gravely and patiently to his visitor's recital and then struck a desk bell. Mr. Chadbeat. That is the worst of these big, busy shops. Annesley had imagined that he was getting on. He now had to repeat word for word to Mr. Chadbeat all that he had just said to the manager. Mr. Chadbeat listened gravely and patiently, and then with a dignified, "Kindly step this way, sir," led the inquirer to a third compartment. "Mr. Note!" "Heavens," murmured Annesley, as the prospect of an unending recital faced him. "I ought to have got it printed." Mr. Note, however, really was the man. He understood. He even sympathized. It was like that. You never could tell. Curious, too. Within the past few weeks they had had a similar inquiry. Yes, in that case, they had been able to supply the order. Really? Then there is a sort of demand? Scarcely that. Not so far as Blackley and Whiting were concerned, at any rate. Of course they had a reputation, and jokers now and then. But it must have been years ago that the last scientific requirement, of course, suggested Annesley. Oh yes, an American. Singular idea. Theory that the English and American races, starting from a common stock, are diverging structurally. Wants to be able to demonstrate it by an English skeleton. I recently struck a man, volunteered Annesley, who was on that tack. Fellow called Lacksome, sort of confidential secretary to old Nog, the USA millionaire. That is the chap, cried Mr. Note joyfully. So you know him? Well, it just happened that we were able to meet his requirement. Quite casually, admitted the caller. He didn't mention this to me. Awkward piece of luggage, won't it be? Of course we had a proper box made. And nicely packed. What he seemed most concerned about was the idea of trouble with the steamship company, or at the customs somewhere. Didn't know anything about that sort of thing, and appeared to have an idea that someone might think it fishy and hold him up. Yes, that might have occurred to me. Quite an ordinary matter, of course. We obtained and filled up a special customs declaration form so that there will be no trouble on that score, and as he still seemed anxious, we wrote to the Cunard Company and got their express acceptance of the freight on our voucher. Now as regards— Thank you, interposed Annesley with a grateful air. I think that should be something for my people to go on. It's a little doubtful, as I said, but if anything, we should do our best. Rely on it, acquiesced Mr. Note with suave dignity. Carrados retrieved a creased sheet of foolscap from his waste-paper basket, thoughtfully straightened it out, and added a few more lines of writing to round off the new position. What precaution has he taken against inconvenient curiosity? He has provided himself with a perfectly bona fide receipt for what he may be suspected of unlawfully possessing, and he has insured against an unusual property, leading to awkward inquiry. He has created a sort of proprietorial alibi, which, like all fictitious alibis, may prove disastrous when it begins to crumble. This time he burned the sheet. The précis was complete. The last up-train from Stratford-on-Avon, with any tolerable connection for Paddington, the 6.32 in those days, had just pulled out of Leamington. There was no lack of accommodation, and the single occupant of a smoking compartment well towards the rear was congratulating himself that he would be undisturbed for the remainder of the journey when two men passed slowly along the corridor, dropping an occasional word of comment. "This will do quite nicely," said Mr. Carrados, stopping at the compartment indicated, and Parkinson slid the door open for him. "Come back as we reach Westbourne Park." "Very well, sir," replied Parkinson, as he closed the door and moved on again. The blind man settled down in his corner seat and lifted his face towards the other passenger. "Ah, Mr. Lacksome, I believe," he remarked sociably. "Delightful old place, Stratford, isn't it?" Rigby Lacksome lowered the late evening paper that he had provided himself with at Leamington Station and favored the intruder with a long, cool stare. "That's my name, sir," he replied with deliberation. "But you have the advantage of me." "Scarcely," smiled Mr. Carrados. He appeared to be in excellent spirits, as though the interview promised some entertainment. "I mean," explained the other man distantly, that I have no recollection of ever having seen you before. That gives me no advantage, for I do not even see you now. What do you mean? Simply that I am blind. Mr. Carrados beamed benignly on his startled fellow traveler. There is no question of who holds the ace, you see, if it should come to violence. Just a modicum of breathing time, sir, pleaded Mr. Lacksome. You cut the ice considerably quicker than I can stack it. Why violence? One never knows. I was talking to a man about a murder recently, just as casually as I am talking now to you. He became very violent. Lacksome's vaguely calculating glance went round the narrow place they were enclosed in and came back to the self-possessed figure in the other corner without losing a shred of its own slightly arrogant assurance. "There's some mistake, I guess," he remarked. "Are you one of the Scotland Yard outfit?" Mr. Carrados laughed appreciatively. No, he said. "You mustn't poke fun at our national institutions, Mr. Lacksome. I am really no one. I ought to have introduced myself before. My name is Carrados, Max Carrados. I am just interested in things." "I see," commented the other reflectively. Then he added, "Any particular sort of things, might I inquire, sir?" "Crime in general, if it promises originality. At the moment I am curious to clear up one or two points in what I might call the mystery of the anatomical specimen." Rigby Lacksome stretched his limbs and yawned slightly to demonstrate indifference. "It sounds like a three-reel thrill, all right, Mr. Carrados," he said. "What does it hinge on?" "I'm afraid," apologized Mr. Carrados, "that it hinges on one of your own articles of luggage. No, the communication cord, if that is what you are looking for, is on your side." "I guessed you were trying to put it across me about being blind," said Mr. Lacksome cutely. "I don't want the cord, but I want to know right here before we go any further how you come into this. It's a detail of our old-fashioned judicial system," explained Mr. Carrados. "According to these antiquated laws, it is the duty of the merest outsider, myself, for instance, to arrest and give into custody anyone whom he reasonably suspects of having committed a felony." "Is that so?" drawled Mr. Lacksome, moving a careless hand. "How does he get on with it if he finds himself looking down the barrel of a gun?" "What, violence already?" chid Mr. Carrados amiably. "And after I had warned you, too. But the answer to that, Mr. Lacksome, is that a blind man, and you may take my word for it, never knows, of course, that he is looking down the barrel of a gun." Rigby Lacksome's hand went back again to its former position. "Excuse me relapsing into the vernacular, Mr. Carrados," he remarked, not without a streak of admiration, "but you certainly are the gelidest brand of guy I've ever struck." "Of course," assented his companion. "Why not? I am sure it would shock you immeasurably if you met an Englishman who began to show traces of emotion under any circumstances whatever. You, for your part, are the most accomplished body snatcher I have so far had to do with. Something like an hour must elapse before we reach Paddington. Why should we not entertain one another like two travelers in a mid-Victorian Christmas annual? Preparatory to being handed over to a posse of the station police at the terminus?" The blind man raised a deprecatory gesture. "Surely you must have misunderstood me, Mr. Lacksome. I said that such was the duty of every citizen. Alas, how few of us do our duty nowadays." "Just put it into English for me, sir," said Mr. Lacksome wearily. "I'm late on the gear clutch, I admit. It is quite simple. You will find that at Westbourne Park we shall slow down almost to nothing. There will be a couple of plainclothes men waiting on the platform. If I show a white handkerchief at the window, they will just step on to the footboard and take instructions. If I show a certain colored one, they will know that the case has dropped through, and they are not wanted." "Great," admitted Mr. Lacksome with suspicious fervor. "I had no idea that we were doing this for the movies, sir. And now let me tell you, Mr. Carrados, that you have given yourself the devil of a lot of trouble over nothing. The particular equipment that you seem to have had your nose into when no one was looking is a scientific exhibit that I've bought here for anthropological use in America. Like to see Blackley and Whiting's receipt for it?" "Not just now, thank you," replied Mr. Carrados. Mr. Note showed me the counterfoil, and we needn't waste time over the arrangement made at the Claverhill Street branch of the SWL, or your understanding with Rainproof Nog, nor the engagement of Sam Barbell to be foreman of repairs. Hell, was wrung from Rigby that makes a bobtail flush, I must allow, sir. I can only put up one card against a hand like that, but I guess he is the joker. Well, you think I've lifted the mortal remains of old man Shakespeare to join the rest of Great Britain that we've accumulated over there, don't you, sir? I think you set out with that idea. Say yes, Mr. Carrados, won't you? Pleaded Lacksome. I should love you to guess wrong just once. Was it the curse you weakened on? Mr. Lacksome smiled his pagan superiority to such a failing. It was not, sir. I wouldn't deviate one jot, tittle, or iota for a sack full of best-assorted medieval curses. Besides, do you think that the man who heart-throbbed to the tune of Romeo and Juliet, of Rosalind and Orlatito, and of Florizel and Perdita, would care a banana skin what became of his loose parts after 3 centuries, if it would help me to win Sabina Craddock? No, sir. There wasn't a milligram of gall in old man Shakespeare's constitution. It seems to me, remarked Mr. Carrados, remembering something very similar not long before, that whatever anyone wants to do about Shakespeare, it is easy to find authority in his works for doing it. That is so, agreed Rigby simply. W. Shakespeare was not for an age, but for all time, not of one country, but common to the world, and he said everything that there is to be said on every subject. That's where old man Nog left the track. He has worked it out that Shakespeare was an American citizen, and he's tickled to death at the idea of getting him for his national temple. I think someone else has already proved that he was a German, said Mr. Carrados. So why not a German-American? Both wrong, sir, replied Mr. Lacksome. Shakespeare was really a literary syndicate. Rainproof is demonstrably non-compos mentis on that subject, and his infirmity is spreading. My own concern is to get my matrimonial, and I may add financial arrangements put through before he is actually certified. You see how I am fixed? Carrados nodded sympathetically. But you haven't yet told me how you came to fail, he said. Fail, considered Rigby dubiously. Well, as to that, you are quite satisfied about it, Mr. Carrados. Life is full of surprises, admitted Carrados, but I must stand by my opinion. The stone had not been raised, the joint wouldn't even take water, and you certainly had not tunneled. You are right, sir. The paralyzing truth is that the stone can't be raised. Can't? Why not? That will have to wait for another generation to find out, I guess. All I know is that we had a patent suction jack, for of course we daren't use leverage, capable of raising 5 tons dead weight, drawing on a stone weighing something less than 500 weight, and it couldn't budge it a hair. No, sir, do what we might, it had us beaten to cold cinders. And if you want my obiter dictum, I should say the biggest thing in W.S. Enigmas is waiting patiently there for some bright boy to come along and scoop it. Quite likely, agreed Max Carrados. You aren't the first to have a try by any means. And you are not going away absolutely empty-handed, I imagine. Mr. Lacksome's face relaxed appreciably from its smart, purposeful expression into something suspiciously like a genial grin. Well, come now, Mr. Carrados, he replied. What should you say? You know that right beneath my feet there, by what they call the old charnel house, there were enough ancient bones of every sort and kind to stock the field of Waterloo. Skulls, arms, legs, middles, toes, fingers, ribs, and what not, and there on the other side Hiram S. Nog is lapping up my cables and biting his nails to keep calm about it. Why should we disappoint the poor old monomaniac in the midst of plenty? Why, I've even rooted out a few odds and ends of antique coffins and a brass plate with something that you couldn't say wasn't a spear cut on it. Oh, Rainproof will be satisfied, never fear, and Sabina will be satisfied, and I don't see why Rigby Lacksome shouldn't be satisfied too. And in about another century, there'll be the dandiest Shakespeare mystery spring up at Nog's National Temple that ever was. The suburban lights had been growing thicker for the last few miles, and the slackening train now began to dodge its way across the maze of points and switches. Parkinson's restful face appeared at the window, and the corridor door was pushed open. "We are approaching Westbourne Park, sir." Lacksome started at the name, and despite the amiable relations that had occupied the journey, his face was not without a shade of anxiety as he spoke. "I hope you are satisfied as well, sir. After all, no one's a red cent worse off. Rather a fine point, though, isn't it?" conceded Mr. Carrados. "However, you're on the platform side. Perhaps you'll show this from the window." Rigby snatched the dark silk handkerchief from the blind man's hand and turned to wave it vigorously at the open window. "But there's not a soul along the platform," he exclaimed blankly, looking back. "Say, Mr. Carrados, have you been patting one over on me?" "Dear me," confessed Mr. Carrados, quite crestfallen. "Can I have dreamt that part of it, after all?"